Hi, I'm Eric, and today I'm going to be looking at the GUIs for Uber Eats and Menulog. Out of the two user journeys I looked at, the first was about finding vegetarian options. I got users go into Uber Eats, set an address, specify location, and search for vegetarian options. Then First Sam, which is the only restaurant that appears on both apps, navigate to the vegetarian section of that menu. For this, I assume that since it was more of an exploratory type context, the users would be looking for easy and efficient ways to sort through the available restaurants and would be relatively pleased with what they have. But once I actually get into that menu and see there's no immediately clear way to see what the vegetarian items are, that's where the frustrations would start, because while they do want some freedom to explore, they only want that for the relevant items. Now, in this next task of ordering McDonald's, I looked at it again from Uber Eats about finding the nearest McDonald's, going there, ordering one Big Mac, then at checkout, changing that order to one Big Mac meal with medium fries and Sprite. Now, for this, my assumptions came from my personal use of the McDonald's app and ordering from McDonald's in restaurant, and finding out that it's really quite an inconsistent experience on Uber Eats, since normally you would order a burger and then decide if you want that as a meal or individual burger. Whereas in Uber Eats, a meal and individual burgers are quite separated. So I'm assuming that would cause a user journey that's full of confusion, backtracking, and a lot of learning. So I chose to observe my brother and mom using these apps, and I figured because of their different experiences with delivery apps, they would have quite varied experiences. So for Ryan, finding vegetarian options in Uber Eats was relatively painless, with the key exception being he didn't realize you could select categories in the menu from the top bar because this didn't appear until after he started scrolling. In Menulog, he had a little bit more difficulty because he couldn't really see that search icon very clearly and tried the filter and sort icons, but none of them helped in this case. He did, however, find that Menulog displaying the categories first before items required less scrolling and ambiguity for him. And for Phoebe, she had a lot more issue with Uber Eats at the start. Being a first-time user, she found it quite confusing. And she actually didn't end up completing the task as intended. However, when she went to menu log, mainly because of that category first approach that Ryan also liked, she found it a lot more beginner friendly and a positive experience. So in the second task of ordering from McDonald's, Ryan went largely as expected, finding the major pain point being the difference between meals and individual items, which was quite contrary to what he normally came to expect when ordering from McDonald's. However, what was really interesting was when he then went to menu log, he seemed to have learnt from this prior struggle and assumed that there could be a likely potential that the burger would be in individual items. And then menu log's category first approach helped him quickly confirm this assumption. For Phoebe, it was roughly quite a similar process, with one major key point being it took her 27 seconds to realize she was actually ordering a meal, not a burger, partly because they were both labeled the same as Big Mac. And again, she found menu log a bit more easier to use. So, based on his observations, as well as external research into growing trends, the first persona we've come up with is Brian, who is a vegetarian but also relatively low income. So, he needs to be able to meet those dietary needs while also being able to save money. And he's especially frustrated by things such as ambiguity over something that is vegetarian or not. And also, despite being the only person on his phone, having to manually search vegetarian or filter every time he orders. In terms of suitability, neither app really makes a positive experience for him. They both cover a certain benchmark in allowing him to actually search, but they don't really go much further beyond that. In Menulog, it's especially hard to actually find restaurants because they're not tagged as vegetarian and there's no filter. But in Uber Eats, it's hard to find vegetarian items because they don't have that consistent icon like Menulog does. So the other one of the personas is Monica, who's a small business owner and uses delivery apps to order food for her staff and family, and also allows her staff to expense their own food deliveries. And food delivery for business is a really growing area, with Uber Eats for Business launching globally this year, continuing to be a core focus of the company. Now, Monica needs things like business expense integration, bundles and quantity discounts, fast reordering, and live tracking. She gets frustrated with complicated procedures and the friction of always having to change between her work and home addresses. In terms of suitability, both offer things such as real-time tracking and ease of reordering, but Uber Eats is a clear winner for Monica with things such as business preferences, personalization, saving multiple addresses, quantity discounts, and loyalty rewards. And these are all things that Menulog doesn't have. Now, looking at heuristics, the first one here is recognition over recall. And in this regard, Menulog performs better overall, as although it has more constraints and steps in its process, such as having to first select category before we can select the items in it. This also does create a more beginner-friendly, streamlined process with less ambiguity and need for recall than Uber Eats. A clear exception, though, however, is in advanced functionalities such as search, where these icons are really quite small and unlabeled in menu log, which can create ambiguity. Whereas on Uber Eats, the search icon is in a search bar, which has text prompting the user what to do, and there are labeled icons at the bottom of the screen showing clear, visible affordances with no need to remember the location. In terms of consistency and standards, both apps maintain a level of consistency in matching expectations and the real world in terms of the overall steps. But Menulog seeks to take that a little bit further by prioritizing consistency through the whole experience with things like those standardized vegetarian icons, whereas Uber Eats looks to have more diversity and personalization, sacrificing initial ease of use for a more engaging long-term experience. So the user's mental model of these two apps was really initially quite strong. They had a clear understanding of the overall path to progress, with the path mostly consistent across apps and the real world. And this was also supported by strong signposting with colored buttons that clearly indicated the next step. They did struggle in terms of having some unusual elements that clash with their traditional understanding, such as meals and items being separated. But what was interesting was the mental model was able to overcome and adapt to that, learn and become stronger overall. So I think overall, this process has really evolved upon my existing assumptions. The pain points were roughly where I thought they would be, but the observation and analysis allowed us to probe deeper into the underlying issues. So for vegetarians, for instance, the app technically allows them to meet the dietary requirements, but doesn't create an experience for them as unique users. And for different ordering scenarios, like a meal combo from McDonald's, the app technically allows this, but it doesn't do so in a way that fits into a user's established mental model. And so I think overall, Newlog and Uber Eats have designed systems that successfully translate ordering experiences online, but fail to design for the more extremes in both users and scenarios. Thanks for your time.